This is Dr. Rich Schuttler, and I'm presenting lesson number 9 in How to Write Chapter 4. This lesson is directed specifically at presenting your data in Chapter 4 by the research questions for a quantitative study. In this lesson strategy, as you can see, lesson 9 here is part 2 of 3 parts dealing with presenting quantitative data. In the next lesson, I will provide 12 tips and strategies for presenting quantitative data to wrap up this 3-part series. Then, with lesson 11, I'll give information on writing the introduction and conclusion sections to your chapter, as well as then in lesson 12 with a wrap up of the entire 12 lesson strategy for how to write chapter 4. In this lesson, in particular, I will address presenting quantitative data by research questions. I will conclude this with a reflective summary as I do with each lesson. In particular, starting out with presenting quantitative data by research questions. In presenting quantitative data by research questions, while this may seem like it's common sense, I have found that sometimes common sense is not so common. And so, therefore, I just want to make sure you understand that probably the best way is to do it sequentially. Research question number 1, number 2, number 3, and depending on how many research questions you have. I have had students who have had 1 research question in quantitative study. Most tend to be somewhere between 2 and 4 research questions, but I've also had students with 11 research questions in a quantitative study. It just depends on what study you're doing and how many research questions you had to have. But regardless how many you have, I encourage you to put them in order of research question number 1, 2, 3, as they should be basically relating to the independent variables that you have in your study. Provide explanations of what statistical tests were used, why so, and the formulas. I encourage you, as you get into writing your Chapter 4, before you start writing information about the research questions or for each individual research question, give information on what statistical tests were used. It's not enough just to tell us that you used a chi-square test or a t-test. Help us understand why you did that. We want to make sure you know why you use the test to make sure that you're able to discriminate between the different tests and you know what's appropriate. I also encourage you to provide the formula for that t-test or chi-square test or whatever test it is that you have applied to your data. This way, we know and everybody else knows in case they want to replicate your study or read from your work and learn from it, that they know exactly what tests were run, for what purposes, and they actually get the formulas that you used. For formulas, provide in a figure and cite the valid source. Wherever you found your t-test or chi-square test, or of course any other test that you may be applying to your data, provide the source. There are many different sources for each statistical formula. There have been known to be some errors in certain formulas. Regardless of where you got your formula from, help the reader understand. Because remember, if somebody wants to replicate your study, the best way for them to replicate it is to go to the same sources that you used. So provide that information. And I encourage you, as you do this with the formula, let's just say, for example, you're going to indicate for each research question, let's say you did a chi-square test. Indicate that you did a chi-square test, why you did the chi-square test. Then in a figure, show the formula for that chi-square test. Then in another figure, input your numbers into the chi-square formula and then show the answer, the quotient, as you were able to determine the outcome of the use of that formula. This way, everybody understands exactly why you used the formula, what the formula was, where you got it, and then shows your work in that formula to show the answer in a mathematical calculation. Use the same format for each research question and null hypothesis. I encourage my students, they're working on their chapter 4s when they're putting together quantitative data, is to give the information by research question. Then address the independent variable and how it was tested to the dependent variable. Then give the formulas. Then once the formula is completed, then have a narrative that suggests how the null hypothesis was tested and the outcome being that the null hypothesis was rejected or it failed to be rejected. And I encourage my mentees to end the section on each individual research question with that null hypothesis outcome. As always, I encourage using the narrative, the tables and figures and narrative. I believe a good Chapter 4 for a quantitative dissertation as designed by each individual research question will first have some sort of narrative research question and then the independent and dependent variables, then provides the tests that were run, provides the test formulas, then provides the information into the test formulas transposed to reflect the numbers from your dissertation, if you will, and then another narrative that concludes the outcome of that formula testing, and then the evaluation of the testing of the null hypothesis and whether it was failed to be rejected or it was rejected. Now, this is a short lesson, but I want to spend a little time with you showing examples from a couple of my mentees who have done work with a quantitative study. My mentees, both of them were approved on the very first pass as they went through their university reviews, and not because of me or the committee members, it's because they did great work. They were focused, they added value, and you'll see the breadth and depth in just a moment. But I do want to let you know that my mentees have the copyright on their work. I just own the copyright on this program. So please do protect the copyright for my program. And if you're interested in learning more about my mentees' work, you can go to ProQuest Dissertations online and download them. That's the reason why, for example, on the first one here, I give you Dr. Joseph Hagee's name, the year his dissertation was published, and the name of his dissertation. You can go into ProQuest Dissertations and look for this title, and you'll find his work, and then you could download it if you care to. His dissertation is titled Influence of Religion and Religiosity on Leadership Practices in the Workplace, a Quantitative Correlation Study. Now I'm going to show you a couple excerpts out of his work, and you'll see in question number 2 here, in particular, you'll see how he addressed research question 2 was developed to determine what correlation, if any, existed amongst the religiosity of organizational leaders and their leadership practices. The null hypothesis, H2O, stated that no significant correlation would exist among the religiosity of organizational leaders and their leadership practices. The Pearson R statistic is computed to measure a linear relationship between two variables measured on an interval level, whereas Spearman RHO-RS in parentheses 103 coefficient is used to measure the linear relationship between two variables that were measured on an ordinal scale. And he cites Steinberg here, 2011. So you can see by reading this, he gives you information about research question number 2, what it was, the null hypothesis, which test he used, and why. Now you can see in table 22 of his dissertation, which again, adding tables can add value to your dissertation, shows the correlation between the religiosity level and leadership practices. And then he gives table 22. I have cut and pasted this straight out of his work, as he allowed me to do. So you can see all the information for the different religions, whether it be all Christianity or Islam, and the numbers associated with it from his testing. He went on to indicate correlations between the RPI index and each of the leadership practice dimensions was computed for the entire sample, showing a small negative correlation with RS values ranging between negative 0.02 and negative 0.08. Correlations for the Muslim group and the leadership practices were not statistically significant, but they were for the Christian group. Although the correlation coefficients were relatively small for Christian leaders, they were statistically significant. See how he explains this information for the reader. Consider this type of breadth and depth in your own work, and you'll start to see the value increase. He went on to indicate further analysis was performed to explore the possibility of demographic variables affecting these results by filtering the data set on gender, age, and religion. A correlation analysis was run on the LPI score, RPI index, gender, age group, size of organization, type of organization, and the number of people led. The age group variable showed small but statistical significant correlations with both the LPI scores and the RPI index, and it gives you the numbers there. The type of organization was negatively correlated with the RPI index. Subsequently, correlation coefficients between the LPI score and the RPI index were calculated for the various age groups within each religion cluster as shown in Table 23. And you see here is Table 23 as he broke it out based as he indicated, both by Christians and the sample size and Muslims, and then he gave the age group ranges there for each, and then he gave the RS and the P2-tail testing results. This is value added. Notice how he used a couple tables along with the great narrative. And then he shows, as shown in Table 23, the religiosity and leadership practice of Christian organizational leaders aged 31 through 40 had a Spearman RHO correlation coefficient of 0.59, P equals 0.000. The religiosity and leadership practices of Christian organizational leaders range from 41 to 50, had a Spearman RHO correlation coefficient of 0.32. P there equals 0.028. The correlation coefficients were considered small, but significant for P greater than 0.50. The religiosity and leadership practices of Muslim respondents of all ages were not statistically correlated. Based on these findings, the results for the second hypothesis were mixed. See Table 22 and Table 23. See how he concludes this section? The null hypothesis was rejected for Christian respondents, but not rejected for Muslim organizational leaders. Now, Dr. David Beckett in 2015, in his dissertation titled Correlation Analysis of ICU, that's Intensive Care Unit, High Reliability Leadership Concepts, and Hospital-Acquired Affections, provides this. Research question hypothesis 1. To what extent, if any, is there a correlation between the frequency of using hand hygiene audits and incidence of hospital-acquired infections in ICU? There was not a significant correlation between the frequency of hand hygiene audits and the incidence of CAUTI, and he gives the numbers there, 2 tails, and he provides information there. You can see the level of detail as he has. He goes on to indicate findings suggest a negative correlation as hand hygiene audits increase, the frequency of the CAUTI and CLABSI decrease with no significant relationship. Findings for the C. diff suggest a positive correlation where an increase in the frequency of hand audits correlates to an increase in the frequencies of C. diff with no significance. Therefore, the testing failed to reject the null hypothesis. This was his whole paragraph on research question number 1. You don't have to have a lot of information in there. You just need to have valid information that's accurate, that supports the testing of a null hypothesis. He went on to indicate interpreting measures of correlation strength. Correlations may be characterized in terms of strength and direction. And he cites Bachman. Cohen, 1988, suggested a classification system to determine the measures of strength between relationships. With this classification system are suggested values for small, medium, and large effects. Cohen's 1998 classification effect size ranges were used as a guide to determine if the relationship of significant findings in this study represented a weak or strong relationship in the context of other research. Notice he gives enough information here, and he is citing other people's work because it's appropriate for what he's doing here. And here's Table 10. He shows the small, medium, and large relationships and shows you the numbers that he had and used. See, this is a place where a table adds value because here very quickly we can see the differences between the small, medium, and large relationships. Now, if you don't understand the numbers here, that's beyond the scope here of this lesson strategy. You could certainly open up his dissertation and learn more about those if you care to. In this lesson strategy, as part of the reflective summary, I want to just indicate that this lesson provided information about helping you understand how to present qualitative data by research questions. In most quantitative work, it's easier to present your work in Chapter 4 by research question from research question number 1, 2, 3, and however many you have. There was some reason early on in your proposal that you decided which independent variable would be used for research question numbers 1, 2, and 3. You start out with that process in the proposal. Continue that on in your dissertation presentation of data in Chapter 4, and the reader will be consistent in the flow of information should they be reading from chapter to chapter. Plus, it also keeps in mind whatever strategy you did use in Chapter 1 and you put your research questions together initially continues on in a consistent manner throughout your work. Then I gave a couple examples from two of my mentees, which of course I encourage you to go to ProQuest Dissertations and download their work. If you find value in the work or if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact them through their names. You can find them both online and social media. And if for some reason you can't and you still want to reach out to them, send me an email and I will send you their direct email because I stay in touch with both of them and they continue to do great work. I encourage you to continue on and do great work as well. And as we go through this lesson strategy, the next lesson, which will be lesson number 10 of 12, which is part 3 of 3 in presenting quantitative data, I'll give you 12 tips and strategies for presenting quantitative data. And I encourage you to use those 12 tips and strategies as a checklist. Use that checklist as you design your Chapter 4 and or as you get your Chapter 4 done to go back and check to ensure that your work is done as well as it could be and that bring great credit upon you and your university. Stay consistent in how you present information for each research question. As I've alluded to here, perhaps start out with a narrative about what the research question is and how you tested it, which statistical tests you used, provide the formula, then show the formula again with your mathematical calculations, then show the result, and then have another narrative which supports leading to how you tested your null hypothesis and its answer of either you rejected the null or failed to reject the null. I'm Dr. Rich Shuttler, and it's a pleasure to be able to share some time with you and some of my information that's really worked well for the mentees that I've worked with. If you find value in this lesson strategy, please continue on and tell other people about it as well. And if you want other information on anything I'm doing in regards to lessons, free webinars that I continually provide, and or weekend workshops, check my website at drrichshuttler.com.